So our first briefer set a very high bar. Everybody has to be as great as she was. Just, I don't want to put any pressure on the rest of you, but, actually I do want to put a little pressure on the rest of you. That was an excellent briefing, but I think you'll discover that they're all going to be excellent briefings, because believe it or not, over the course of the summer, one of the things that you spent a lot of time doing is practicing and learning how to do these things and do them within 10 minutes, which is not easy. It's actually much easier to talk for hours and hours than to get everything down to 10 minutes. But once you can do that and be succinct, you become someone who's in demand. People prefer to get this news quickly. So in any event, I've stalled long enough. Most of you are in your seats. So let's hear about the Rocky Ecosystems Protection Act.
Hi, everyone. My name is Isabelle Branco-Lo, and I present to you the Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act. I want to thank my faculty advisor, Dr. Palmer, task members, Louisa Mediana, project managers and personal heroes, Josefina and Anastasia, and of course the rest of my team. So this is the Northern Rockies, and it is gorgeous. And it's actually considered an area of national interest. And the introduction of the Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act actually identifies 4 specific benefits of the land. The recreational value is inseparable from the physical conditions and ecological integrity of the land. Millions of people each year come to kayak, swim, canoe, hike, fish, hunt. And likewise, the same features and conditions provide educational and research centers for scientists like biologists, ecologists, geologists, etc. More locally, water is extremely important in the region. 70% of the local population's drinking water comes from this region. And extractive industry contributes greatly to the local economy and actually provides natural resources to the rest of the country. Now, unfortunately, one of these values acts in direct contrast with the other 3, and that's extractive industry. You might have guessed it. More specifically, the extractive industries that are identified are mining, oil and gas, and timber, and they're supported by infrastructure like roads and facilities. And in concert, these all act together to pose a major environmental threat: the pollution of water, degradation of land, and the threat to wildlife. Now, the bill addresses these problems through solutions, assigning protections to land and water, restoring ecological integrity of the land and water, and lastly, together, these help provide the economic structure that is both driven and drives ecological productivity, known as a green economy. Now, the designations more specifically are wilderness designations, wild and scenic river designations, biological connecting corridors, and wildland recovery areas. And these 4 distinct definitions assure the achievement of 4 goals: the protection of the ecosystem, the improvement of water quality, conservation of wildlife, and restoration of land. Now, the first of these designations is the wilderness designation. And there are plenty of areas that are already designated as wilderness. As you can see in the light blue, this is a region of Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. There's existing wilderness, and that is defined by the 1964 Wilderness Act as an area free from commercial activity, industry, motorized vehicles. And the dark blue area is proposed wilderness by the bill. And this expansion is important to protect areas like the Piatt National Forest. Now, the Piatt National Forest has been decimated by unsustainable timber extraction known as clear cutting. Clear cutting not only decreases the potential for carbon sequestration, but it also increases erosion rates, which makes it very difficult for the land to recover after such decimation. Likewise, with wild and scenic rivers, there are rivers that are already designated as wild and scenic, and you can see the existing rivers here in the region. But the expansion, over 1,500 miles of additional waterways, could be designated, including the Coeur d'Alene River and Lake in the panhandle of Idaho. Now, what this map shows is the level of contamination of lead in the sediment of the lake. This contamination is caused by over a century of unregulated mining practices in the Silver Valley. Now, the dark blue, which is basically the entire lake, as you can see, indicates concentrations of over 1,500 parts per million of lead in the sediment. And based on a very basic risk assessment regional screening table produced by the EPA, the suggested concentration for humans to interact with soil is about 400 parts per million. So 1,500 parts per million is much greater. Biological connecting corridors could look something like this, and they are natural land migration pathways for wildlife to move between populations. And this is important to prevent habitat fragmentation and biodiversity loss. This is a map of gray wolf populations in the area. The reason why animals need to move, especially the gray wolf, is to find shelter, mate, food, and the facilitation of this movement is essential in restoring and conserving wildlife populations. The last of the designations is the restoration and recovery areas. These are meant to restore vegetation through encouraging native population growth and reducing invasive species through weeding, recovering damaged land through soil compaction and slope restoration, and restoring water quality from the removal of barriers to encourage free-flowing conditions in waterways. Now, all these designations together help to build the foundation of a green economy. If the land and water and wildlife are restored to their natural conditions, more people are going to want to come and visit this area. Recreational revenue will increase for local communities, it'll strengthen local businesses, and jobs will be created. Now, measuring the success of these solutions, the designations, comes in a variety of ways. One of the most effective ways to measure forest regeneration is remote sensing through GIS technology and satellite imagery. A study was done in the Colorado Front Range, a little bit southwest of the Northern Rockies area, and it proved to be an extremely effective tool. Wildlife can be tracked using very high-frequency radio collars and GPS, not only to track the populations of the actual wildlife, but to use as an indicator for the environments that they inhabit. Specifically, the Canada lynx, the reproductive success of this animal is directly correlated with the health of the mature and multi-storied forests that they live in. Likewise, this can happen with plants too. The quaking aspen is one of the 14 vital signs designated by the National Park Service as a measure of ecosystem health in the western United States. Now, with the successful implementation of these solutions come new questions. If species recover, how does this pose threats to other interests in the area? When planning land and water restoration, which restoration techniques will be employed? And lastly, if extractive industry is limited, where is the space in the conversation for sustainable industry? More specifically, the recovery of the gray wolf in the region has been a point of contention between farmers and conservationists for years, as they pose a threat to cattle and other livestock. Active restoration and passive restoration are two restoration techniques that have different benefits, but neither has been established as more efficient than the other. Active regeneration involves the active habitat regeneration, controlling invasive species, which could be beneficial if you're looking to create jobs and have people involved in the project, but could be detrimental if you're on a tight budget. Passive restoration allows the area to reestablish on its own. And lastly, sustainable timber harvest. Not all timber harvest is clear cutting and degradating to the land. Sustainable timber harvest can be done to mimic the natural disturbance and regeneration of this area. And so the question is, can this make its way into the conversation? Overall, the Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act defines 4 distinct designations that result in achievable goals. The success of these designations can be measured, although controversies still remain. Thank you.
Great presentation. Given the sort of global nature of trade and the movement of goods, is there sort of a risk in terms of passive restoration that invasive species can be more easily introduced into areas that maybe historically have been more protected given their sort of remote nature?
It's definitely a possibility. I actually don't know the specifics of active and passive restoration. I do know that the main difference between them is time and the resources that need to be employed. But that's all I know.
Thank you. Okay, other questions? Over here, Trustee Charles.
Thanks very much. In your group, did you have a discussion about whether mining can ever be sustainable? I see your example was of forestry, and I understand selective forestry, but what about mining?
Absolutely. In a previous week, we had a presentation all about the controversies, and sustainable timber was actually only one of the number of things that were considered with sustainable industry. And we did talk about sustainable mining, and it is possible and something that is being discussed in the higher ups.
One more question if we have it. Okay, we reached perfect understanding. Thank you.
Thank you.